Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it without raising her voice. She never did. She leaned closer, eyes steady, smile calibrated for witnesses. She said if I touched her again like that, she would make a scene. The kind that never washes off. The kind that follows you into rooms long after you've left them. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Silence is my job. I manage security for live events, galas, premieres, fundraisers where donors pretend not to drink and executives pretend not to stare. My work is preventing scenes before they exist. I read exits, angles, people who are about to lose control. I know how fragile reputations are. I know how loud a whisper can get. That night, the venue was a museum atrium. Glass ceiling, cameras everywhere. My wife, Claire, was in her element. PR director to a public figure means you live on the edge of visibility. You fear it, but you feed on it too. She floated from cluster to cluster, correcting stories with a laugh, moving hands off shoulders before anyone noticed. When she reached me, she didn't stop walking. She said the line as if it were a scheduling note. Touch me, and I'll make a scene. I let her pass. That was the first change. People don't notice silence right away. They notice rhythm. And when the rhythm breaks, they feel it before they understand it. Across the room was Ethan Cole, media consultant, professional arsonist. He builds narratives the way some men light matches, just to watch who flinches. He and I had crossed paths before, publicly polite, privately adversarial. He enjoyed testing boundaries. He enjoyed watching other men choose restraint and calling it weakness. I caught his eye for a half second. He smiled like he already knew the ending. Later, while Claire spoke to a donor, Ethan leaned close to her. Too close for comfort. Too close for coincidence. She didn't pull away. She adjusted her posture so the cameras would catch only confidence. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't carelessness. This was leverage. When she returned, she didn't look at me. She checked her phone. A message arrived. Her thumb paused, then moved. I saw the decision land. She was choosing escalation. Not because she wanted him. Because she wanted control. I felt something settle in me then. Not anger. Alignment. If she wanted a scene, I would give her one. Just not the way she expected. The next morning didn't explode. That's what made it dangerous. Claire moved through the apartment like everything was intact, like the previous night had been a misunderstanding between lighting and mirrors. She talked about schedules, about a client crisis she'd handled, about how visibility was currency and currency required risk. She didn't ask why I hadn't come to bed. She didn't need to. Control doesn't ask questions. It assumes answers will arrive on time. At work, I ran a charity summit downtown. My team watched me more than usual. They're trained to read micro shifts. They noticed I stopped correcting small things. A badge crooked. A guest standing too close to the stage. I let the room breathe. I let it reveal itself. Silence does that. It invites people to fill it with mistakes. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. Ethan's assistant, maybe. Or someone pretending not to be. The message was polite, professionally vague, and unnecessary. He wanted to align narratives ahead of an upcoming media cycle. I didn't reply. I archived it. Non-response is louder than refusal. By late afternoon, the first confirmation arrived without effort. A calendar sync glitch. A shared device that shouldn't have been shared. Claire's schedule updated with a dinner she hadn't mentioned. Private. Off record. The location wasn't discreet. It was strategic. A place where sightings travel faster than apologies. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask who she was seeing or why. I adjusted my own calendar instead. I removed my name from 2 upcoming events where we were listed as a couple. Quiet edits. No notifications. The kind of changes only noticed when people look twice. That evening, I stood across the street from the restaurant, not watching the entrance but the reflections in the windows. I saw Ethan's shape before I saw hers. He leaned in the way men do when they believe the outcome is guaranteed. Claire arrived 10 minutes late, as always. She smiled the way she smiled when she thought she was ahead of the story. I left before they sat down. I didn't need proof. I needed timing. Back home, I packed nothing. I changed nothing. I slept in the guest room with the door open. When Claire came in later, she paused, just long enough to notice the distance had been rearranged. She said my name once, softly, like a warning dressed as concern. I didn't answer. That was the second change. And this time, she felt it. Control hates uncertainty. It starts leaking through the smallest cracks. Claire began narrating her days without being asked. She over-explained delays, name-dropped meetings, attached meaning to nothing. I listened the way I listen to rooms before a crowd arrives. Not for content. For cadence. Lies rush. Truth settles. I didn't dig. I let systems do what they always do when people get careless. Shared accounts remember. Access logs don't feel guilt. Patterns don't need confrontation to confess. A location history updated at odd hours. Ride receipts that didn't align with her calendar. A hotel chain app that pinged with a welcome back notification meant for someone else's phone but tied to our email. She never noticed. People who weaponize scenes underestimate quiet. At work, I made myself scarce. I delegated more. I stopped standing beside stages during photo ops. The absence read as confidence. It always does. Promoters leaned in, asked if everything was fine. I said nothing beyond neutral assurances. That's when people start filling silence with their own conclusions. I let them. The proof came from a place that wasn't meant to be proof. A bank alert for a charge that didn't fit our pattern. Not extravagant. Careful. Almost respectful. The kind of expense meant to pass unnoticed. It didn't. I didn't screenshot. I didn't save it. I memorized the time and moved on. Evidence is heavy. I needed momentum. Ethan's name surfaced without effort after that. A mutual contact mentioned his recent wins, the kind built on borrowed access and well-timed leaks. Someone joked that he had a new muse. I didn't ask who. The joke wasn't for me. It was for the room. Rooms talk when they think you're not listening. At home, I adjusted the furniture. Subtle things. A chair moved. A lamp turned. Space communicates before words do. Claire noticed, but misread it as stress. She reached for me once, public-friendly, fingers light, eyes already scanning for witnesses. The old threat hovered between us, unspoken. Touch me, and I'll make a scene. I stepped back. Not dramatically, just enough to break the frame. She froze, then smiled harder. That smile cracked at the edges. Control requires participation. I was withdrawing mine. That night, I booked a place under a corporate account I'd used 100 times. No emails. No shared calendars. I didn't pack clothes. I packed clearance. By morning, the city would still see us listed together. By night, they'd feel the absence. I wasn't collecting proof to win an argument. I was clearing space to exit without friction. The third change had begun. I didn't announce anything. Announcements invite resistance. I let the day run as scheduled and removed myself from it piece by piece. I left early without saying goodbye. I muted shared notifications. I turned off read receipts. Not to provoke panic, yet, but to create a lag. Control collapses when feedback disappears. By noon, Claire texted twice. Neutral check-ins dressed as logistics. By 3, the tone shifted. A question mark became a sentence. A sentence became a call. I didn't answer. I was already somewhere else, sitting in a rented apartment with clean lines and no personal history. The kind of place that doesn't remember you after checkout. I changed my routine first. Gym hours. Coffee shop. Routes. Then I changed what mattered. I redirected my salary to a private account. I paused the joint cards without canceling them. Just enough friction to feel like a glitch. Systems don't accuse. They confuse. Confusion is louder than denial. That evening, she posted a photo from an event we were both supposed to attend. She tagged me out of habit. I didn't react. No like. No comment. The tag stayed. Orphaned. People notice orphaned things. They lean closer. By the second day, the calls stacked. Missed calls tell a story of their own. I let them ring out. I watched the timestamps drift closer together. Control accelerates under stress. I knew the pattern. I'd managed worse crowds with fewer exits. Ethan made his move then. A public-facing comment under her post. Harmless on the surface. Familiar underneath. He was stepping into the frame I'd left empty. He thought absence meant surrender. Men like him confuse space with weakness. I didn't block him. I let him perform. On the third night, I slept without checking my phone. That was new. Silence stopped feeling like strategy and started feeling like clarity. I wasn't hiding. I was unavailable. There's a difference. Hiding waits to be found. Unavailable doesn't. When I did check, there were voicemails. Her voice had lost its polish. Not panic yet. Fracture. She asked where I was. She asked if everything was okay. She said people were asking questions. She didn't ask about us. She asked about optics. That told me everything. I didn't respond. I changed my number that morning. Kept the old one active, unanswered. A lighthouse with no keeper. I forwarded nothing. I explained nothing. I removed my name from one more event, quietly, and watched the guest list update without it. By the end of the week, she wasn't chasing me anymore. She was chasing the silence I'd left behind. And silence doesn't negotiate. Ethan overplayed it. That was inevitable. Men who thrive on chaos mistake momentum for immunity. He started showing up everywhere Claire did, as if proximity could rewrite history. Panels, dinners, after-parties where reputations brush against each other and everyone pretends not to notice the fingerprints. He liked being seen. He liked being implied. I watched from a distance I designed. Not surveillance. Awareness. The same way I monitor a venue after I've left it, checking exits, listening to echoes. You don't need to be present to understand flow. A former client called me, not to ask where I'd gone, but to ask if I'd noticed something off in Ethan's recent work. The question was framed as curiosity. It was concern. Ethan had been sloppy, rushing narratives, leaning too hard on unnamed sources. He was building fires too close to dry wood. I didn't answer the question directly. I never do. I redirected it. Asked if the client had documented concerns. Asked if compliance had been looped in. Silence on the other end stretched. Then the truth arrived on its own. There were emails, drafts, messages that suggested coordination without clearance. Nothing illegal by itself. Just enough to make risk officers sweat. I didn't forward anything. I didn't warn anyone. I simply stopped being a buffer. By midweek, Ethan's tone shifted online. Less swagger. More defensiveness disguised as humor. Claire mirrored it without realizing. She shared articles too aggressively. She corrected comments that didn't need correction. PR people only do that when the ground moves under them. She tried reaching me through intermediaries then. A mutual friend. A colleague. Someone who thought neutrality was kindness. I thanked them and declined. My absence had become a variable they couldn't model. That's when power changes hands. Behind the scenes, a contract Ethan was counting on stalled. Then another. Delays became reviews. Reviews became questions. Questions don't accuse. They circle. He started blaming algorithms. Timing. Anyone but himself. Claire posted less. When she did, the captions stretched longer, explaining feelings no one had asked about. Explanation is confession in public life. The audience senses it before they understand it. I stayed quiet. I didn't correct rumors. I didn't confirm separations. I let people notice patterns. Events where she arrived alone. Photos where I was cropped out by necessity, not design. The social rupture wasn't loud. It was cumulative. Ethan lost altitude fast. Not from an attack, but from exposure to his own reflection. Claire noticed too late that he couldn't protect her from consequences he didn't respect. I hadn't touched either of them. I hadn't said a word. I'd simply stepped out of the frame and let gravity do the rest. The first public crack didn't come from me. It never does. It came from someone who thought they were being helpful. At a fundraiser downtown, a donor asked Claire why she'd been handling security questions herself lately. The tone was casual. The implication wasn't. People had noticed I wasn't there. Not beside her. Not behind her. Not anywhere. She laughed it off. She always did. Said I was consulting on a long-term project. Said schedules were complicated. She said it too quickly. Speed betrays preparation. Preparation betrays fear. By the end of that night, the question had spread. Not the answer. The question. In public life, unanswered questions grow teeth. I heard about it from a former colleague who still worked events I used to run. He said the floor felt different. Less controlled. More reactive. He didn't ask where I was. He asked if I was coming back. I told him I was fine where I was. That was the truth. I'd reduced my footprint to exactly what I needed. No more, no less. Claire reached out again, this time through work channels. A calendar invite appeared on my old email. No subject line. Just a time and a place. Neutral territory. Professional. She was trying to reframe the narrative before it framed her. I declined without comment. That same week, Ethan missed a panel he was scheduled to moderate. No explanation. Just a last-minute replacement and a vague apology posted hours later. The audience filled the gap with assumptions. They always do. Chaos feeds on silence, but silence feeds on itself. Claire's circle began to thin. Not dramatically. Subtly. Invitations that didn't arrive. Group chats that went quiet. People who smiled but didn't lean in. Social isolation doesn't announce itself. It just removes warmth. She posted a photo from a private dinner, trying to signal stability. The image did the opposite. The table was wrong. The faces were wrong. The energy was off. Someone commented asking if everything was okay. She deleted it. Deletions are louder than replies. I remained absent by design. I didn't correct anyone who assumed we were still together. I didn't deny anyone who assumed we weren't. I let ambiguity do its work. Ambiguity is unbearable for people who live by image. One night, she left a voicemail that wasn't polished. No anger. No accusation. Just exhaustion. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten so quiet. She said she felt like she was standing on a stage alone, lights on, audience gone. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear it. Because hearing it had changed nothing. The social rupture was complete. Not with a headline. With a pattern. And patterns are harder to undo than scandals. Isolation doesn't arrive all at once. It settles. It teaches people the weight of empty space. Claire began to feel it in places she used to command. Rooms that once bent toward her now held their shape. Conversations stopped adjusting to her presence. She was still invited, but no longer central. That shift is brutal for someone whose power lives in proximity. She tried to anchor herself to routine. Same gym. Same cafe. Same morning post, timed for engagement. The numbers dipped anyway. Not enough to alarm a casual observer. Enough to unsettle a professional. Algorithms don't betray you. They just stop favoring you. I was still around, technically. In the city. In the industry. But not in her orbit. I'd positioned myself where I could see without being seen. Old habit. I took on consulting work that kept me backstage, out of photos, out of captions. My reputation didn't need visibility anymore. It needed precision. She started appearing at events early and leaving late, trying to fill the gaps with effort. Effort reads as desperation when it's unreciprocated. People noticed she talked more, laughed harder, corrected stories that weren't wrong. Her control was slipping because it had no anchor. Ethan disappeared almost completely by then. Not dramatically, just fewer mentions, fewer tags, fewer invitations. His chaos had burned through its fuel. Without me in the frame, he had nothing to push against. Men like him need friction to feel relevant. Claire reached out again, not through intermediaries this time. Direct. A message that didn't threaten a scene. It didn't leverage anything. It asked if we could talk. Not to fix things. To understand them. That was new. That was late. I didn't answer immediately. I let the message sit long enough to change her posture toward it. Silence reframes intent. When I finally responded, it was with a single sentence and no punctuation. Not tonight. She waited. She always hated waiting. Waiting strips image down to nerves. In the days that followed, I noticed something shift in her public tone. Less certainty. More reflection. She shared an article about burnout without commentary. She reposted a quote about accountability. Not apology. Accountability. It was the first time she'd gestured inward instead of outward. I stayed distant. Not cold. Distant. There's a difference. Cold invites reaction. Distance invites reckoning. By the end of that week, she looked smaller in rooms. Not weaker. Just alone. And alone is where truth gets loud enough to hear. I hadn't confronted her. I hadn't accused her. I'd simply removed myself as her stabilizer. And without that, everything she'd been balancing started to tilt. The seventh change was complete. She wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting the quiet. We met in a place with no audience. That was her condition, framed as practicality. She chose a quiet hotel lounge at an hour when light fades and staff stops hovering. Neutral ground. Controlled environment. Old instincts. I arrived early and took a seat that didn't face the entrance. Habit again. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't need to. She came in slower than she used to. Same posture, less certainty. She scanned the room the way people do when they're not sure who they're performing for anymore. When she saw me, she paused, recalibrated, then approached like this was a professional meeting that might turn personal if handled carefully. She spoke first. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A request for context. She said she didn't understand how we'd gone from proximity to silence. She said she'd felt pushed into corners she didn't recognize. She said she never meant for things to escalate. Her voice stayed even. Her hands didn't. I listened without interrupting. Not as restraint, as completion. People talk themselves into clarity if you don't rush them. She referenced pressure, image, fear of losing control. She said the night at the museum had been misread. She said the threat had been a boundary, not a weapon. I didn't correct her. Correction invites debate. I let the gap do the work. When I finally spoke, it was brief. I said I hadn't left because of one night. I said I'd left because I recognized a pattern that no longer included respect. I said I didn't disappear. I'd stopped participating. The words landed heavier than I intended. Or maybe exactly as intended. She leaned forward then. Not dramatically. Earnestly. She asked what I wanted now. The question mattered. It meant she was done negotiating optics and ready to hear terms she might not like. I told her I wasn't there to renegotiate the past. I said I'd built a life that didn't require constant explanation. I said proximity would not return without accountability that didn't need an audience. I didn't threaten to leave. I didn't promise to stay. That unsettled her more than anger would have. She searched my face for leverage and found none. She said she missed the stability I brought. She said things had fallen apart without me. She said she hadn't realized how much she'd relied on my silence. I stood, not abruptly, decisively. I said reliance wasn't the same as partnership. I said I was open to rebuilding, but only from ground rules she didn't get to set alone. I didn't wait for agreement. I didn't ask for reassurance. As I walked out, she didn't follow. She didn't call out. She stayed seated, absorbing the fact that the scene she'd once threatened no longer had me in it. And for the first time, she understood that the quiet wasn't punishment. It was the boundary. Collapse doesn't look like failure at first. It looks like overextension. Claire tried to compensate by doing more of everything. More appearances, more messaging, more reassurance offered before it was requested. She filled the silence with motion, and motion without direction burns energy fast. The first real loss came quietly. A client chose not to renew. No explanation, just a polite transition email and a calendar cleared without ceremony. Then another partnership stalled. Meetings became touch base later. Later never came. Reputation doesn't shatter. It thins. She stopped posting altogether for a week. When she returned, the tone was different. No declarations. No confident framing. Just neutral updates, stripped of narrative. The audience responded with distance. Engagement follows certainty. Without it, attention moves on. Ethan was gone by then, functionally erased. Not canceled. Not exposed. Just irrelevant. His chaos had nowhere to land. Without my presence to push against, he faded into background noise. Claire noticed, but there was nothing left to confront. The threat she'd used as leverage had evaporated. That's when memory started turning on her. She remembered the way I used to stand slightly behind her at events, scanning rooms while she smiled. How I'd reposition people without touching them. How crises never reached her because I absorbed them early. At the time, it felt invisible. Now it felt irreplaceable. She remembered nights when I said nothing, not because I didn't care, but because I was thinking 3 steps ahead. She used to call it distance. Now she recognized it as containment. The realization didn't arrive as clarity. It arrived as pressure. Each new inconvenience triggered an old memory. Each unanswered message reminded her of how much stability had been outsourced to my silence. She tried rebuilding alone. Therapy, strategy sessions, rebrands, all useful, none sufficient. You can't manufacture trust at scale. You either earn it or you borrow it. She'd borrowed mine for too long. When she reached out again, it wasn't with requests. It wasn't even with regret framed for acceptance. It was a simple acknowledgement that things had fallen apart because she'd mistaken control for safety, that she'd confused my restraint with permission. I read it without reaction, not because it didn't matter, because it arrived after the collapse, not before it. Timing is the difference between growth and consequence. She lost status, not publicly, structurally, the kind of loss that doesn't trend but changes how rooms respond. She felt it every time a conversation ended too soon. Every time a door didn't open automatically. I was already living differently by then. Not better. Cleaner. Fewer variables. More choice. Her world hadn't ended. It had clarified. And clarity, without someone to lean on, is heavy. That was the 9th change. The moment she finally understood that the quiet wasn't something I'd done to her. It was something she'd lost. We didn't reunite the way people expect. There was no announcement, No carefully framed photo signaling resolution. There was just a gradual reintroduction of proximity, measured and conditional. I didn't move back in. I didn't restore old routines. I allowed access where there had been none, and I watched what she did with it. Claire adjusted. Slowly. Without performance. She stopped trying to explain herself into relevance. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it wasn't to manage perception. It was to state facts. That alone changed how rooms responded to her. Respect doesn't rush back. It approaches when it senses stability. We met occasionally. Coffee. Walks without destinations. No negotiations disguised as affection. I didn't revisit the past. I didn't need to. The past had done its work. What mattered was how she handled the present without leverage. She asked once if I was staying. The question was quiet, almost embarrassed by itself. I told her I wasn't leaving, but I wasn't returning either. Not to what we'd been. I said presence was something I offered now, not something assumed. I said scenes no longer had power over me, because I wouldn't be in them. She accepted that without argument. That told me more than any apology could have. I stayed because I wanted to, not because I was needed. That distinction mattered. I kept my space, my schedule, my silence. She learned not to fill it. She learned that access was earned daily, not secured through threat or image. People eventually stopped speculating, not because they understood what had happened, but because there was nothing dramatic left to consume. Stability is boring to an audience. That was the point. Ethan's name disappeared entirely. Not from spite. From irrelevance. Chaos without witnesses collapses inward. I returned to my work differently. Less visible. More selective. I no longer prevented scenes for other people while tolerating them in my own life. Order, I'd learned, starts with where you choose to stand. The last time Claire referenced that night at the museum, she didn't defend it. She didn't explain it. She just acknowledged it as the moment she'd mistaken threat for strength. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't need to. Accountability had replaced fear. I didn't disappear. I stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And when I chose to be present again, it was on terms that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The quiet held. And this time, it wasn't empty. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.